Hey everybody, hope you're doing well and ready for the weekend. I know I sure am. It's summertime, the sun is out, and the weather is looking great. So, that is a perfect time to sip on some whiskey and get some fresh air and just kind of enjoy the outside naturalness. Now, in this video, it's actually going to be a second edition of the Whiskey Wanders from Costco in Mountain View. So I did one earlier this week. This is going to be the second half of it. It's in the Bay Area in California. So sort of right next to, actually, right across the street from Stanford and just down the road from the places the likes of like Microsoft and Google and NASA. So maybe you heard of them before, but it's a bunch of like other kind of techie smart people places. And I decided to do a second one of this because of all the great, amazing stuff that was at this Costco in Mountain View. So I decided to do a second Whiskey Wanders so we can talk about some of the additional whiskeys that I've found other than the first three that I thought were amazing. But these ones are actually pretty interesting too. Now one thing that is pretty crazy about the Bay Area, I guess, actually, probably there's two things that are kind of crazy. One is the carpool lanes. They look like math problems. You gotta have 3 people on a Wednesday between 3 and 4 on every other Tuesday. Which is, I don't know if I'm getting fined or not. I'm probably going to end up getting fined. The other one is that they have these Waymo cars driving around that look like cars from Back to the Future. More like cars from Back to the Future, but cars that they thought that we would be driving in the future from Back to the Future, if that makes any sense. But they are technically driving themselves, so it's pretty cool. But either way, the vibe in NorCal is so much different from SoCal. It's way different than what you get in LA. And I kind of like it. Of course, I love LA, but the kind of Bay Area is pretty cool. Now, anyways, in this video, I go over some really interesting whiskeys that I have begun to see more and more, which is this Kavalan, which is the single malt from Taiwan, the Glen Grant 18, which I don't think I've ever seen before, but looks interesting, and the Ardnamurchan. Ardnamurchan? I think that's how you say it. It's a lot of letters in one spot that don't look like they go together, but Ardnamurchan, which I think is sort of a sleeper type whiskey that only shows up in the US on kind of random blue moons, which seems pretty appealing to that inner whiskey collector of mine. Sort of like when you see that last bottle on the shelf, I always just grab it just in case. I sometimes end up putting it back, but more often than not, I end up just buying it because it's the last one. So it appeals to that side of me as well. Now, before we get to it, of course, I want to say thank you all so much to those folks out there, most of you all gentlemen, but there's a 5% ladies, I see it on the stats, who do stop in and check out these videos. It's really great to have you all a part of this growing whiskey community, and I'm just so thankful for you all taking your valuable time to watch and do comments, and it's just really cool, and it kind of has a great feeling to it, and it makes making these videos really the best part of my day. So thank you again. Also, if you do like these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. Almost forgot to add that in there. Now, with that, let's get down to business. So let's talk about this first whiskey that I saw, and it caught my eye pretty well primarily because the wife has been on my case about adding some more scotch to the whiskey collection because, frankly, as an American with American tastes and growing up on the likes of Jim, Jack, and other types of Evan Williams, bourbons, and maybe even perhaps I've inherited it. I don't think Grandpa and all those folks drinking lots of bourbon. Maybe bourbon just kind of speaks to my soul. But lately, as you can see, if you've been watching these videos, I'm really enjoying discovering scotches, Irish whiskeys, and the sort of new American whiskeys too, things that are outside of that typical box of the quote-unquote American bourbon. So when I see something like this Glen Grant 18, I usually take notice. Now, I don't always buy them, but I do usually check them out and take a look at them, see the ratings, and see if it's something that I may want to add to the collection to kind of beefing up my my Scotch side. Now, the Glen Grant 18 is a single malt whiskey that is produced out of Speyside and is one of the newest expressions available in the Glen Grant line. Glen Grant, interesting, was established in 1840 by two brothers, James and Glen Grant, who had started as illegal distillers in their native Scotland and actually ended up getting a license only a couple years later, I guess 7 years later. a while, in 1847. And eventually in 1972, Glenlivet and Glen Grant distilleries amalgamated into one single company called the Glenlivet Distilleries, along with two other shareholders from the outside, one of which is Courage Ltd., which I don't really know, but the second one is Suntory, that Japanese distiller who makes Harmony and Hibiki and lots of other Japanese whiskeys. And then since 2006, it was acquired by Campari, who was eventually acquired by Pernod. All right, so that's that. Now, for this Glen Grant 18 specifically, we can see that the cost here at Costco is set at $115.99, which is actually a pretty good price for an 18-year-old Speyside. Actually, you know what? How much is it for the Glenlivet 18? I think I just saw it. Oh, actually, it's $109.99. Well, either way, it seems like a reasonable price, especially in comparison to what the other kind of big box stores, Total Wine. And actually, Bevmo doesn't have it, but my local liquor store in LA does. So they have it at a higher price. I didn't see it at Bevmo. So at the Total Wine, they're asking for $139.99. And then at the local liquor store, they're asking for $129.99 for the GlenGrant 18. So if you do end up picking them at Costco, you end up saving $14 over the local liquor store price, which is the lower of the two, or 10.77%, which is still a pretty good savings. Now, the ABV on the GlenGrant 18 is at 43%, so it's going to be something that you really could kind of sip all night and not have to worry about a hangover in the morning. And the tasting notes on it mention things like malt, fruit, vanilla wafers, and almond spice, which all sound pretty good because, one, I love vanilla wafers, and two, also, if you've ever had the vanilla wafers, like the pudding and the fruit and the cream or whatever, pretty amazing. Now, the scores on the GlenGrant 18 are pretty good because I got an aggregate score of all the reviews that I could find, put them together at 87.13 points out of 100. It means that if you do see it, and of course, if you can fork out the $100 and some odd dollars, it may be worth considering to pick one up. For me, though, overall, I did skip this one because at this specific Costco in Mountain View, I ended up picking a couple other scotches that I really thought would be more interesting, and they were, a quarter of the price. So for me, it looks good, but I bought the other ones because I thought they looked more appealing. Okay, so the next whiskey that really honestly catches my eye pretty much every time I see it, and I've been seeing it more and more, is this Kavalan Single Malt. And it has a very different vibe to it, almost like a hip vodka vibe. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but like a hip and cool after party vibe to it, something that you would find at a happening bar on a rooftop lounge or somewhere like that. The music and stuff. It's from Taiwan, which seems to be having a bit of a moment right now when it comes to production and exportation of whiskeys. And I don't know. The Japanese, they have had a pretty good go at it, making a whiskey in Japan in a Japanese style, which the world has become to love. And I don't see why Taiwan wouldn't be able to do something interesting and contribute from their own perspective to the art form of whiskey. The Kavalan Single Malt specifically is a non-age statement, this one specifically, and it is produced and named in Taiwan and named after the Kavalan tribe that was one of the first native Taiwanese people. It's distilled by Kavalan King Car Distillery and has been producing whiskey. They have been producing whiskey for about 14 years. Kavalan, or King Car, I guess, whichever, claims that because of the very hot and humid climate of Taiwan, it allows for higher proofing of the whiskey when it's bottled and a shorter maturation process. And this is something we've heard a couple times from, Rangpur, the Indian one, and also, I can't think of the name of it, but there's a Chinese one that all make that same claim that because it's hot and because it's humid, that it shortens the whiskey time. It sounds a bit like a marketing ploy, like, hey, you know what, you can get 12 years of age flavor, but you can only do it in 5. That'd be great, right? But there's no. Thankfully, luckily, there's no skirting time, so you can't get older before you're older, and unfortunately, you can't get younger when you're older either. Now, this Kavalan Single Malt is specifically designed for the American market, so that means it's designed for the American palate, and no, that doesn't necessarily mean that, it lacks any of the flavor profile that it would have. Outside of it, it just means that, Americans like kind of bolder, in-your-face styles of flavors, and sometimes I guess even in personality and in conversation, miss the nuances of something else. So I think that they make this whiskey really to have that kind of upfront, in-your-face flavor. Now, according to Taiwan's regulation, though, it does have to be aged at least 2 years and is aged in barrels that are malt neutral. So technically, what my understanding of what malt neutral means is that these barrels have been used so much they have nothing left to give to the whiskey. So I'm not sure how that's a benefit, but they did include it on the maker's website. So I don't know. Maybe there's something good there. You can all tell me, but it doesn't seem like a benefit, but yeah. So let's talk about the price. Now, so for this relatively unknown whiskey, at least here in the West, the price seems fitting at $38.99. And I believe this one specifically is supposed to be a luxury type whiskey, but it also occupies that position in the whiskey lineup of Kavalan that's meant to be used with mixes. So, it's best to put it, in the same category as maybe like a Johnny Walker Red. It is a luxury, quote unquote, luxury product, but you don't feel guilty using it with some soda or water or Coca-Cola if that's your thing. But that being said, it can be found at both Total Wine and Bevmo at considerably higher prices. At Bevmo, in fact, they have it for sale at $79.99, and at Total Wine, it's lower, but still a lot more expensive than at Costco at $54.99. So that means if you do end up buying it at Costco, you'll be saving around $16 off the Total Wine price, which is the lower of the two, or 29.10%. Which is, that's a really good savings. I think it's more of a situation that Total Wine is overcharging for. Now, the ABV on this is pitiful. It's at 40%, which basically means that in some parts of the ex-Soviet Union, it's still considered a soft drink. Literally, it'll get you drunk pretty much at the slowest possible rate legally available to whiskey makers, and still calling it a whiskey. But that aside, the tasting notes on it mention things like caramel, citrus, vanilla, butterscotch, hay, and orange marmalade, which are all pretty nuanced flavors and could probably be a reason to justify, if you were trying to justify, the lower ABV so that those flavors can stay nuanced and not be overpowered by something really strong alcohol flavors. Now, the reviews on the Kavalan Single Malt, they're not great. There's just no way around it. They're not good. They're not terrible, but they're definitely not great. And again, you have to keep in mind this is a starter level whiskey for the total line. So it's like the Tokai from Suntory, which also got relatively low reviews. The Johnny Walker Red, which I don't even think I've seen the reviews for it. I should probably take a look at that. Or Jack Daniels, which I always think is unfairly rated low. But again, I have a love for Jack Daniels. So it's not going to be, this one is not going to get the highest marks, especially when reviewed by professional or pro-am whiskey drinkers. I'm not claiming to be a pro-am or even professional, but the reviews that I found online are usually from folks who have a very serious whiskey tint to them. So just bear that in mind. But for me, this one was also a skip, and it's primarily just because the problem is that I'm stuck in a situation where I want to try this whiskey, but these, it's a lower level out of the line, it's the less expensive ones, and it also gets reviews that are not great. So I can either choose a lower line one that's less expensive with lower reviews, or I can get the high price iterations, that have better reviews, but are more expensive. So, I don't want to spend money on one that I may not like, the expensive one, when, I could try the lower one, but the lower one doesn't get very good reviews. So I think what I need to do is I need to go find a place that has this by the glass or by the shot or whatever, and then try that out and see if it tickles my fancy. Now, the other problem with that is that if you're at a nice cool bar, the fact that there's a guy in the bathroom giving you mints also changes the way the flavor of the whiskey is. The ambiance affects the flavor, and so I think it's a distinct view. So I don't know, I'm overthinking it, but I just this one was actually a pass for me because, I'd rather just take that money and spend it on something like another bottle of Lefroy, or this one's gonna be a pass. All right, now on this last one, which I'm actually pretty happy that I did end up picking up, and it was completely random. I don't have a great reason why, or at least the last time I didn't have a great reason why I picked this one up. I think it's actually just kind of the esoteric nature of the labeling that kind of got me. This is the Ardnamurchan Ad7 21 2004, if I'm reading that right. And you know what? I think it's the labeling that includes that, like the Anno Domini, which struck me as a history buff. It kind of struck out to me because essentially it's referencing itself within conjunction of time and history and nostalgia. So yada yada yada. That's why it got me. I think that's why. Because now I think that's exactly why. But the Ardnamurchan 8721 2004 or '04 seems like an under-the-radar type whiskey that has a bit of a cult following. They release it sort of at random dates, and only specific batches ever even make it over to the New World, let alone the shelves on Costco. It's named after a Scotch peninsula of the same name that stretches out into the Scottish Highlands in the south of the island of Skye. Isle of Skye. It was opened in 2014 and only uses sustainable production methods like local energy sources, specifically a hydroelectric generator that attaches to the local river, and uses a boiler fuel to fuel its stills that are made from wood chips from the local foresty people. Those guys in the green outfits that, Smokey the Bear type folks. So I guess that'd be rangers, right? And lastly, it uses the mash tune, that's the stuff that's left over after after it's malted, to feed to local farm animals. So they get farm animals who taste like delicious whiskey. And this basically essentially makes the organization the equivalent of a whiskey distillery of an earth ship. I don't know if you see the earth ships. It's like sustainable houses made out of tires in Nevada or somewhere. Now, the Ardnamurchan 7/21/04 uses casks that are 65% ex-bourbon and 35% sherry casks. And this entire batch went specifically to the U.S. So to me, that's kind of interesting. Now, the price that we see it being sold here at Costco is at $55.99, which is actually pretty close to what you can find it at the local liquor store, at least here in LA, or at Total Wine, moreover. It looks like, in fact, at the local liquor store, they have it here for sale at $69.99, or at the Total Wine, they have it available at $61.99. So that means that if you do end up picking it up from Costco, then you'll be getting a slight savings over the Total Wine price at $6 or 9.68%, which is, it's not a lot, but it's not nothing either, I guess. The ABV on the Ardnamurchan is set at 46.8%, so it's got a bit of juice to it. There's some juice worth to squeeze to it. And the tasting notes mention things like flamed orange peel, ripe pear, sweet soy sauce, pepper, and campfire, which is definitely different from kind of everything else. Now, the rating scores on this one, they're not the best, and I'm not really sure why. Well, actually, you know what? I can imagine it's probably because looking at the tasting notes, it's just a bit off from what you would normally expect out of a whiskey. And, all, if not a majority of whiskey drinkers, I guess I can't say all, but a majority of whiskey drinkers, at least in the US and probably worldwide, including myself, seem to be very much like the movie watching public in the US. We say, hey, we want a new, innovative, and interesting type of movie, but what we really want is more of the same. Like, just more Top Gun reboots. So, you know what? I think this one is going to fall victim to its own creativity. So I can see why the reviews on the whiskey that has hints of things like soy sauce to it could be off-putting for someone whose palate is specifically tuned to stay within the kind of box of Scotch or whiskey. Now, that being said, again, I did end up picking up a bottle, and when I do try it, I guess I'll look forward to it being interesting, and I'll probably end up busting it out when I'm looking for something kind of outside the baseline. All right, so that's it for today's Whiskey Wanders in Mountain View in NorCal. That's the Bay Area, kind of around San Francisco. And I will, of course, I want to say thank you all again to all of you who have made it this far in the video. And I hope you enjoyed this video, in fact. And if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when my newest videos get put up. Also remember, if you do see a whiskey you love, just buy it. Because if you don't, somebody else surely will. It might even be me. All right, so that's it for me today. Have a great day. Have a great rest of your weekend. I hope you enjoy it. I'm out, and adios.